Love and Thunder is out in theaters now. I recently got the chance to see it again for the second time, and I will say I did like it a little less on rewatch. I still really like the movie, but there were a few more things I noticed that bothered me on second rewatch, but I'm going to get into those a little bit more. It's mostly in the writing department. I'm going to get into those more here in this spoiler review for Thor Love and Thunder. So if you have not seen Thor Love and Thunder yet, and you don't want to be spoiled, this is not the video for you to check out. I have a spoiler-free review. I'll leave the link to that in the description below. You guys can check that out for my spoiler-free thoughts on Thor Love and Thunder if you haven't seen the movie yet and you don't want to be spoiled. If you have seen the movie and you want to be spoiled, or if you haven't seen the movie and you just don't care about spoilers, welcome to the Thor Love and Thunder spoiler review. Now, you know how these usually go. Sometimes I jump around. Sometimes I go in sequential order. When I go in sequential order, I try and break it up by topics for you guys. That way, in case you have to pause the video, you can just go to the timestamp and pick up where you left off. So I think that that's what I'm going to do here with Thor Love and Thunder. I think that's the way to approach Thor Love and Thunder. There's just some movies where I feel like you can't have that approach. But Thor Love and Thunder, I feel like I can approach it in that way. So the movie opens with Gorr the God Butcher and his daughter walking through the desert, and Gorr's daughter, Love, ends up dying. And this is really the first glimpse we get of Christian Bale as Gorr the God Butcher. And Christian Bale, in his long-lost audition for Mad Max Fury Road, wanders to his god and asks to bring his daughter back, but his god's like, nope. He's given the Necro Sword, and he vows to kill all gods. And he actually kills his god, too. Now, a lot of people have a problem with this whole Necro Sword thing, that it's just used as a MacGuffin to get Gorr's motivation going, but I feel like, I don't know, I didn't really look at it that way both times that I saw the movie. The first time I saw the movie, I was just like, okay, he's going to his god for help. His god is saying no. I don't think I necessarily picked up on the whole Necro Sword thing where it was like, oh, this will give him the powers to kill the god. It will kind of like mind fuck him, you know. I didn't really pick up on that, and I really didn't. That's not really how I see Gorr's motivation in this movie. I really don't see his motivation being driven by the Necro Sword. I see his motivation being driven by the fact that he wants his daughter back. He was pleading for help and nobody would help him. And the Necro Sword is just the thing that he can use to kill the gods. And I just thought, for me, I just thought that him grabbing the Necro Sword made it so that he had the ability to kill all the gods. It wasn't like corrupting him and telling him, hey, you gotta kill all the gods. Like, it wasn't because I didn't see it as because he grabbed the sword that made him kill all the gods. I saw it as this was the weapon that could kill all the gods, and he's going to kill all the gods because everybody was ignoring his pleas for help. So now he wants to eliminate all the gods. That's how I saw it. I know people have problems with the Necro Sword. It's kind of like this big MacGuffin. Is it as big as Gorr wanting Stormbreaker later on in the movie? Probably not. But then we get the Marvel Studios logo and we flash forward and here we are, Korg telling us a story about Thor and Thor trying to find inner peace. But then we get a scene with Thor in the Guardians of the Galaxy where he helps the Guardians of the Galaxy and he leaves the Guardians of the Galaxy. He gets a distress signal from Lady Sif. Lady Sif I actually didn't think they were even going to bring back. But, like, her usage in this movie is very minimal. I mean, luckily she's in the movie more than the Warriors 3 were in Ragnarok, though, I mean, that was just a sin. Lady Sif is at least in the movie, and she gets the distress signal. She's like all beaten up. She's telling Thor about Gorr. The problem I have here is that when Thor arrives, I think it's Thor and Korg that arrive at the place that Sif is at. When they arrive and they see Sif, and she's kind of beaten up, like, we already see that Gorr has done his damage. I think it would have been more impactful if there was a scene written into the script, which I don't know if there, for all I know, there could have been, and they just cut it out. But if we had seen Gorr take out this god that Lady Sif was trying to protect, and maybe if we saw Lady Sif have a small battle with Gorr the God Butcher trying to prevent him from killing this god, instead we just show up on the aftermath of the scene, and I didn't think it was as impactful on rewatch. and it was something that slightly bothered me on my first watch when I saw it at the press screening. Said, I think we could have used maybe one more scene of Gorr in the first half, maybe two, and I think that that would have been the perfect placement for another Gorr scene. But she essentially tells him, like, yeah, Gorr's coming, he's heading for New Asgard, and then here's how Jane comes into the movie. Natalie Portman comes back, and I don't think any of us really thought Natalie Portman was ever coming back after The Dark World. I mean, I was there at Hall H when they announced that she was coming back in 2019. So I remember the moment that happened in San Diego, and she was given the hammer. I said, well, how can she get the hammer? Well, here's my problem with the writing in this movie. There are some contrivances that the movie really just tries to sell you, and you really just have to buy it. It's almost like a door-to-door salesperson who's being very persuasive and is trying to sell you the product as is, and trying to sell you all these upcoming, all these different perks and all these different tiers that you could purchase. You know, that's sort of what some of the situational writing in this movie feels like, because Jane is suffering from cancer. Yeah, interesting way to bring her back, for sure. It's also interesting that Darcy Lewis comes back. I mean, if anything, I really didn't think we were going to see Eric Selvig again. I mean, it's only on a computer screen, but that was Stellan Skarsgård coming back. I was like, whoa! Man, that's one I didn't see coming. I mean, Darcy Lewis, yeah, I mean, I thought that was kind of a given, though. I mean, since she was Jane's intern in the first two Thor movies, and she came back in WandaVision, so I was like, well, if Natalie Portman's coming back, I feel like Kat Dennings has to come back. She does. She's only in it briefly, but Jane is essentially suffering from cancer, so she goes to New Asgard to try and find a cure, and then she sees the broken up Mjolnir, and Mjolnir just senses that she's worthy, and it reforges itself, and Jane Foster becomes the mighty Thor. Okay, I have no problem with Natalie Portman coming back. No problem with Jane Foster coming back. No problem with the Jane Foster cancer story. No problem with Jane becoming the mighty Thor and wielding Mjolnir. It was just weird for me that, and this was more picking up on a couple issues I had the second viewing, it was just weird for me that, like, she got to New Asgard, saw the broken Mjolnir there, and then Mjolnir just somehow sensed that she was worthy. Like, I believe Jane Foster is worthy, but how Mjolnir sensed it and just reforged itself, I don't know. I know that they adapted the Mighty Thor run, like Jason Aaron's Mighty Thor run from the comics. I have not read the comics. I have not read a single goddamn comic book in my life other than Spider-Man's Tangled Web, for Christ's sake. You remember those? All those, like, the compilation of, like, all these Spider-Man stories? That's, like, the only comic book I've read. So my knowledge of this is just, yeah, the movies, that's it. But I know that that is what they adapted. So I'm wondering if that is part of the run of Jason Aaron's Mighty Thor story. But for me, I was just like, okay, this is a contrivance you really have to swallow. I feel like that was just the easiest way to try and make Jane Foster like the Mighty Thor. I get that she's worthy, but I'm just looking at a broken Mjolnir and the Mjolnir being like, Eureka! She's worthy! And reforging itself. That was a little bit of a tough pill to swallow. But hey, when she shows up as the Mighty Thor, though, when Thor is attacking New Asgard, and Thor's trying to save all the children, and all those really shadowy monsters are coming down, and Gorr's there, and she shows up. It was a great scene. I love seeing Natalie Portman and Chris Hemsworth interact again. I feel like there's a bit too much time where it's like, you probably should be focusing on trying to save these kids, because Gorr just kidnapped them all. Like, what the fuck are you guys doing? But I like that Jane is able to team up with Thor, Valkyrie, and Korg and go on this adventure. Okay, so then we get to Omnipotent City, where Thor, Valkyrie, Jane, and Korg go to ask the other gods for help. And this is where Russell Crowe shows up as Zeus. A lot of people hate this scene. I actually think it's pretty smart. I just love how stupid all the gods, especially Zeus, are. I just love that they turn Zeus into a joke. And Russell, like, everybody's like, well, what's with that Russell Crowe accent? I think that that's part of the joke. Like, it's not supposed to, like, it's supposed to be a stupid accent that you're supposed to laugh at, you know, even if it is maybe somewhat offensive. But like that's the thing. The whole point of this section to me was just like, okay, the gods aren't going to help them, and because they're not going to help them, let's just turn them into a joke. And I actually really like that with Zeus. It's this part of the movie where Korg gets broken and shattered into a million pieces. When I first saw it, I was just like, oh fuck, Korg's dead. No. What makes Korg funny though is the fact that for the rest of the movie, it's just like a mask. It's just like his face they're carrying around. So, like, the first thing I could think of was, I'm originally from New Hampshire. So the first thing I could think of was the old man in the mountain rock structure that fell down like 20 years ago. I was like, oh yeah, that's the face from the old man in the mountain. Yeah, they crumbled into Asgard. All right, now go put it back on the mountain. Go fix it. That was Korg and the rest of this movie for me. It has a great action scene here too. Although it's here where I noticed that Valkyrie doesn't really. She gets a lot of screen time, but she doesn't really do much in the movie, and that was kind of a shame. I was like, okay, Valkyrie's the king of New Asgard. That's interesting to see, but I feel like she got shafted in the action sequences. But it's also funny too because Thor ends up taking Zeus's thunderbolt and impales him, so it makes it look like Zeus is dead, and now this thunderbolt becomes a MacGuffin. It's like almost every weapon in this movie is a MacGuffin. Like, okay, yeah, the Necrosword, a MacGuffin. The Thunderbolt, a MacGuffin. Stormbreaker, a MacGuffin. Mjolnir, a MacGuffin. And then Thor trying to figure out his relationship between Stormbreaker and Mjolnir. That's not a MacGuffin, but that's just, I don't know, that was weird. But now we get into like the second half of the movie, and here's where the comedy really tones itself down. And this is where the conflicting tone of the movie is going to be a problem for a lot of people, because the first half is just this fun 80s fantasy space adventure, and then the second half still has that, but it becomes more of a romantic drama with more emotional weight because we get more time with Thor and Jane, and their chemistry is off the charts. I've always really liked Natalie Portman and Chris Hemsworth's chemistry, but Jane Foster herself in the first two Thor movies has always been kind of bland to me. This, they actually attempt to flesh her out as a character, and the emotional weight that the second half produces with Thor and Jane completely sold me on the fact that they could get back together. Like, when they're on the ship and they're talking, and they end up kissing, I'm like, yep, I buy that. Then we also learn later on in the movie that because Jane is wielding Mjolnir and because she's worthy, every time she wields Mjolnir, she's slowly dying. I think it's in the scene where we learn that. It might be later on. I forget. I've seen the movie twice. I should know. It's fresh in my mind. But I think it's here or it's later on where we learn that. Regardless, now we get to the Shadow Realm. One of my favorite areas in a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie because it's all in black and white and the only color is really coming from like Stormbreaker or Mjolnir. There's a really interesting action sequence here, a really fun, entertaining sequence, all in black and white between Gorr the God Butcher and Thor and Valkyrie and the mighty Thor. This is where Gorr becomes more of a presence in this movie. He wasn't in the first half all that much, but he's in the second half a lot. It's mostly here where he just shows up and he just slithers out of shadows and looks like he's slithering like out of like treacherous like bones and shit that's like, ugh, like what the fuck is happening here? But this fight ends up being a ruse created by Gorr so that he can steal Stormbreaker from Thor, because he's going to use Stormbreaker as a way to use the Bifrost to open the gates for eternity. And when he gets to eternity, he's going to ask for the destruction of all gods. And because he does overpower the group, like he does steal Stormbreaker and he uses that to open the gates of eternity. And now Thor has to go and stop him. And Thor's got to go rescue the kids as well. Yeah, it's like Mad Max Thunderdome here. Christian Bale auditioning for Mad Max Fury Road, the second half of this movie, feeling like Mad Max Thunderdome. I guess this is just a Mad Max fan film, huh? Then Jane shows up, and it's like, this is the last time I can wield Mjolnir before I die. So she ends up helping Thor, and I actually really love that scene. Like, the kid's just grabbing anything they can to help defeat Gorr, and Thor manages to overpower Gorr, but Jane ends up dying in Thor's arms, and it's actually this really touching moment. It's actually really sad. Like, I like how she disintegrates into dust, very similar to Odin. in Ragnarok. So I guess that's a way, like, if you have godlike powers, I guess that's essentially how you would pass away, which was interesting. And then Gorr ends up getting to eternity. Gorr gets to eternity, but instead of asking for the destruction of all gods in eternity, Thor actually convinces him that he doesn't want to destroy all the gods, but instead, like, his motivation was just to bring his daughter back. And see, this is why I feel like the Necro Sword had no effect on Gorr the God Butcher. Like, I feel like Gorr the God Butcher's thoughts were just his own, and the Necro Sword just allowed him to be able to carry out his plan. Like, the Necro Sword, to me, didn't really influence his decision to want to kill all the gods. His decision to kill all the gods, to me, really relied in the fact that he lost his daughter, he had no help, and he wants his daughter back. And for me, that's what made Gorr a standout Marvel villain for me. Was the fact that he was relatable, you can agree with him, you felt sympathetic for the guy, and I feel like nobody other than Christian Bale could pull this off. And Thor manages to convince him that that is what he wanted, and Gorr entrusts Thor to look after his daughter, Love. So now Love is on Earth in New Asgard with Thor. Thor now has Mjolnir, and she wields Stormbreaker. Because Gorr ends up dying from the effects of the Necro Sword. Interesting, and I feel like it's here where you can kind of see, it's like, alright, now I think we're somewhat getting a direction where this is going. If they're not doing the multiverse stuff, they're definitely setting up young Avengers. You know, especially with the TV shows that are happening now on Disney Plus, and how we're getting a younger cast coming into the MCU, you can definitely tell that they're setting up the young Avengers. Just before I touch on the post-credit scenes, I want to talk about Jane's cancer a little bit more. I saw it the second time, and I think it was as fleshed out as it should have been. I think we needed a couple more scenes with her struggling with the cancer and the effects that Mjolnir had on her and her becoming the mighty Thor had on her. I don't think that there was enough of that. See, there's just some writing issues that I think needed a little bit of patching up. And that was one of the things where I was like, yeah, there were a couple holes in the script that I felt like with her could have been developed a little bit further, and that was definitely one of them. As much as I don't want to see Jane Foster in pain, I just think it needed to be expressed a little bit more in the movie. I bought it, but I wanted to buy it a lot more than I bought it. So now the mid-credit scene is Zeus is alive, and now he's got his son Hercules, and his son Hercules is entrusted by Zeus to go get revenge on Thor. So I guess that's a setup for Thor 5 if they do a Thor 5. The post-credit scene is Jane Foster being welcomed into Valhalla, and Idris Elba returns as Heimdall. So yeah, she was worthy enough to die and make her way to Valhalla to live in eternity there. Wow. So that's Thor Love and Thunder in a nutshell. Definitely a few more writing issues that I noticed on my second watch. My issues were this running joke with the fucking screaming goats. That was like the one joke where I was like, alright, like, this, enough's enough now. Like, I don't need to see this anymore. That was a bit too much, Taika, if you know what I mean. There were some pacing issues, I think, in the first half, especially since it seems like Gorr's not in the first half all that much. I think he needed one or two more scenes of Gorr in the first half, but I still did really enjoy Thor Love and Thunder, even if I did like it slightly less than I did on my initial viewing. I still think it's a good MCU movie. I still think it's by far the second. Like I said, it's the second best Thor movie. Like, I don't see how anybody could like this less than The Dark World. Maybe, if you really love that first Thor movie, you might hold it a little bit too dear to your heart to put this above it, but, you know, I still had a lot of fun with it, and that's essentially what I'm looking for now with these MCU movies. Like, everybody keeps saying that Phase 4 feels directionless, and that maybe we're getting a little bit too much nowadays with the MCU machine. Maybe they got to take a little bit of a break, and I somewhat agree. I feel like we are starting to get burnt out with MCU movies. They are becoming oversaturated a little bit, especially since they're releasing, 4 movies a year and 5 TV shows a year or 4 TV shows a year, whatever it may be. Like, yeah, it's getting to be a little bit much, but if you can just keep me entertained for most of your runtime and for most of your TV shows, I'll walk out a happy camper. That's my spoiler review for Thor Love and Thunder. If you have seen Thor Love and Thunder, what did you think of it? Drop me a comment in the comment section below. I'll leave my link to my website in the description below as well. You guys are the best. Thank you for watching. My name is Alex Madden, and I'll see you at the movies. So much.